Hello everybody and welcome back to the Code Wrinkles channel for a brand new video. This time we'll talk about a brand new Blazor feature on .NET 5, and this is CSS Isolation. And from my point of view, this is one of the coolest new features that we have in Blazor on .NET 5, because starting with this version of Blazor, we can write CSS that is scoped only to one certain component. And one other very exciting thing about this is that it's actually very easy to use, and we'll dive directly into it. So right now what we have here is the standard Blazor template that comes actually with Visual Studio, so nothing more, nothing less. But for the sake of this video, I think it's just enough to actually show you how CSS isolation is supposed to work in Blazor. So let's dive directly into it. So right now we have this counter component that you probably know already from that Blazor template. There is a very simple button, and when we click on it, it's a counter. It just increments the count, of course, so nothing very special. But let's add some scoped CSS to this component, and doing this is actually very easy. The only thing that you would have to do as a developer is simply to create a new file. Actually, let's create a new file and to name it exactly like the component to which you want to scope the CSS file, only with the added CSS extension, of course. So this is why we'll name this file counter.razor.css. And that's actually it. We have already created scoped CSS only to this component. And to see that this is actually working, let's take the age1 element and color it red. So that's very simple. Now let's run this with .NET watch and run, which is also something new on .NET 5 for Blazor, this .NET watch, and it actually helps you because when you change something in Visual Studio Code and you save the changes, it will automatically also reload the page. This, however, unfortunately doesn't apply directly if you create new files, for instance. Then you have to fire up the application one more time. But if you just modify existing files, this should work very seamlessly. And if we go on this counter component, we can see that right now the title, this age1 HTML element, is colored with red, which is actually what this is all about. And if we take a look in all the other components, if we go on home, for instance, we have this hello world title, which is also an age1, but this one is black, or the standard color that we have in this Blazor template. And if we go to fetch data, where we get some fake weather information, we see that this title, which is also an age1, of course, is also colored with the standard color that we have in this Blazor template. So only this counter component, for which we have written a scoped and isolated CSS, is actually colored in red. And let's try to understand how this CSS isolation works in Blazor on .NET 5. And to do that, I will just inspect this element and just look into what happened here. So if we look at all these divs and the different tags that we have here, we notice actually an HTML attribute that was created. Actually, we notice several. But we see that, for instance, this HTML attribute right here is exactly the same as this one, but our custom component actually has a different one. And this one, we see that it is different. And what happens behind here, and for this we'll go into the sources. So what happens behind is then when you build the application, so at build time, what the build process actually does, it takes all the scoped CSS that you have written for your components, and it creates actually a new CSS file that is called, in my case, CSS isolation.styles.css. And CSS Isolation, because this is the name of the project. So if you name your project differently, it will be your project name .styles.css. And here in this CSS file, we see that we have all the scoped CSS that is scoped to different type of components. And we can see that the scope is applied actually using this HTML attribute that actually Blazor created for us when we built the application. And we have, as we have seen, one that actually we can deduce that it refers to the entire app, but we have also this one that is specific only to our component, and this is the counter. So once again, the way this is supposed to work is when you build the application, what happens is that during the build process, this new CSS file gets created, and all the custom CSS that you have written for your components is actually put here using this automatically generated HTML attributes. And this is actually how this CSS isolation works in Blazor on .NET 5. But before we wrap this up, I just want to discuss another very important topic from my point of view. And that topic is what happens with scoped CSS to only one component if we create child components. And let's take a look here, right here at this counter component. And let's create a very basic component in a new file, and we'll call this a hello world.razor. So that would be our component, and you guessed what we'll have in our component is actually only an age1 tag. But I'm doing a lot of typos, so sorry for that. We have this age1, and we say here hello world, and that should be it. So this is our new component. And here in this counter .razor, so in this component, let's actually wrap the entire component into a div. So we have this here. Let's cut this. Let's paste this here, and let's do Shift Alt F. Sorry. And we format this entire component. Let's click also Ctrl S for saving that. And here, let's add at the bottom this hello world component. And that should be it. Let's save it once again, and let's go back to the browser. Let's refresh it. Let's refresh it once more. Okay. Let's maybe close it and relaunch it, because this should of course display this hello world component right under the button that we have in this counter component. And let's go on counter, and it's still not here. So that's very unfortunate. Let's take a look why this actually happens right now. So we have no errors here, so everything should be fine, I guess. But here is hello world. This is hello world, so the name should be correct. I think we didn't save everything. I guess that's the main problem here. Yeah, sorry for that. And now it refreshes, and right now we have this hello world here, of course. But we see that even if this is a child component of our counter, this age1 is still colored in the standard black color that we have for all other headings in this application. And of course, I guess it's we have a lot of scenarios that when we have child components, we want some of our styles actually to get pushed actually also to our child components. So by default or built-in, scoped CSS or isolated CSS only works for the component to which actually it belongs. If you want also have child components that would inherit some of the styles of the parent component, then you can actually solve this very easily. Let's go back here to this counter.razor.css file, and let's use here the deep combinator. And by using this deep combinator, this would actually propagate this information also towards the children of this component. And in the meantime, you see that the page already refreshed, and right now our child component has also the heading 1 of color red. So using this deep combinator, we can easily pass scoped CSS or isolated CSS from a parent component to a child component. And of course, this is very, very useful because, for instance, if you have styles that you don't want to apply to your child component, then you don't use this deep combinator. But if you have styles that you want to push to all the child components, then you can simply use this deep combinator, and that's actually it. Everything else works exactly the same as we showed previously. And that's mostly it for CSS isolation in Blazor on .NET 5. As said, this is a very, very nice feature. It's very useful, and it's also very, very easy to use as developers, especially if you're new to Blazor and you're now just getting started with it. This being said, thank you very much for watching this video. Please don't be shy and hit the thumbs up button if you enjoy this content. And once again, don't be shy, and if you think that this content might be useful to others, just share it on your social networks with your peers via email, whatever you want. Once again, thanks you very much for watching, and until the next time, I wish you the very best.